Episode 1 of The Marked. Prologue. The First Breath. The world was not always shadowed. Once the rivers were clear, the fields golden, and the villages of men knew no fear of what prowled in the dark. Children laughed beneath open skies. Fires burned at night, not for protection, but for song. But peace never lasts. From beyond the veil of creation came a presence that did not belong. Some said he was once a man who reached too far into forbidden arts. Others whispered that he was born of the void itself, a thing that envied life and sought only to unravel it. His name was seldom spoken, for names give power, but the people called him one thing, in hushed voices: the Poisoner. Where he walked, crops blackened, rivers festered, and the air itself grew sick. Trees shriveled as if choked from within, beasts twisted into horrors, their eyes glowing with hunger, not their own. The Poisoner fed not on flesh, but on the corruption of all things. He was an endless rot, a shadow that seeped into soil and soul alike. The world cried out, and the world answered. From the four corners of creation stirred the great forces that had always been, but never before had taken form. They rose like guardians from the bones of the earth, the breath of the sky, the blood of all living hearts, and the sheltering cloak of night. They were the pillars of existence, each a piece of life itself. Breath, the renewal; springtime, the first spark of dawn; blood, the courage, passion, the sacrifice of one for many; bone, the strength, endurance, the foundation that holds when all else falls; shadow, the cunning, mystery, the unseen shield against what hunts. But the pillars could not fight the Poisoner themselves. They needed hands, hearts, and voices in the mortal world. So they chose vessels. The chosen bore glowing marks, etched into their flesh, symbols of the pillar that lived within them. These were the Marked, champions destined to rise against the Poisoner's darkness. The first was a boy of 16. He was gentle by nature, yet strong of heart, a youth whose laughter had once been enough to lighten a room. One spring morning, he woke to find a sigil burning faintly upon his wrist, the mark of breath. The air stirred around him when he walked, and where he lingered, flowers pushed through the frost. His people fell to their knees, believing salvation had come. The boy, he believed it too. Armed with little more than a staff and hope, he left his village and sought the Poisoner. He found fields blackened, forests strangled by rot, rivers crawling with slime where fish had once swam. And at last he found the enemy. The Poisoner rose before him, shrouded in a cloak of shifting darkness, his eyes burning like coals in a storm. "Little breath," he hissed, his voice like poison in the veins of the world. "You cannot sweep away death with wind." But the boy stood tall. He drew in the air, and the air obeyed. Storm winds rose at his call, tearing the corrupted ground, scattering the Poisoner's twisted beasts, and breaking the mists that cloaked the shadow. For a moment, it seemed he might prevail, yet hope can only carry so far. The Poisoner's power was vast, more ancient than the pillars had feared. He struck, and the boy faltered. Breath was life, but life alone cannot stand against corruption unending. The boy fought bravely until his strength was gone. At last, with no weapon left but the breath in his lungs, he exhaled one final time. That breath did not fade. It rose as a shining mist, wrapping around his village, forming a wall no shadow could pass. The boy's body fell where he stood, but his spirit lived on in that barrier. The first ward had been born. His people were safe, hidden, but their protector was gone. The poisoner raged against the barrier, but it held, and so he withdrew, content to wait, knowing the ward would weaken in time. And so began the cycle. Generations later, another mark appeared. Blood, fierce and unyielding. He fought the poisoner with fire in his heart, but he too stood alone. When he fell, his last sacrifice poured out as a crimson ward. Then came Bone, whose strength was as stone. When he broke, his ward rose like ribcage around the living. Then Shadow, cunning and swift, who cloaked her people in darkness even as her life was taken. Each marked fought, each fell, each left behind a ward that protected their people for a season of years until it faded and the cycle began anew. And so the world became a land of wandering villages, hidden behind fragile wards, moving from place to place to avoid the poisoner's gaze. The people learned to live in fear, never knowing what lay beyond their shelter, never daring to hope that the cycle could be broken. But old songs whisper of a promise. When breath, blood, bone, and shadow rise together, the true protector will awaken, and the poisoner shall fall. It has never happened. The marked have always come one by one, never united. Until now, in a small village behind a ward grown thin, a child stirs from sleep. His wrist burns with light, the mark of breath, reborn in spring. He does not yet know the weight of what has come before. He does not yet know he will not be alone forever. And in the deep places of the world, the poisoner stirs, smiling in the dark. Chapter 1. The Flickering Veil. The village lay in a hollow, where fields pressed close against the thinning veil. At first glance it was like any other, children chasing one another through dust, women hanging clothes from sagging lines, men returning from the fields with shoulders bent beneath the weight of tools. Yet if one lingered long enough, something felt different. It showed in the way some eyes lingered too long at the tree line, in the way some hands trembled just slightly when lamps were lit at dusk. The ward shimmered faintly there, a pale curtain at the far edge of the fields. Once, it had blazed like lightning, impossible to miss. Now, it flickered like heat above stone, half seen unless you stared directly at it. Some swore they saw shadows leaning against it, shapes too thin to belong to men. Others said it was nothing more than a trick of tired eyes, the world stretching itself into stories because people needed them. And so the village was divided. There were those who believed. To them, the thinning veil was proof enough. The cycle spoken of in fireside tales was coming again. The pillars would send another mark, just as they always had. He or she would rise, and just as always, they would fall. Families moved their homes every few generations, not for resource, but for survival. The poisoner never struck where the ward still burned bright. They spoke of the pillars with reverence, as if naming old gods. Breath, the force of renewal, gentle as spring rain, and fierce as a storm's gale. Blood, the fire of passion and strength, the heartbeat of courage, the fury of protection. Bone, the keeper of memory and endurance, silent and steady, the weight of all that came before. Shadow, the whisper in the dark, cunning and unseen, the shield against what hunts. Each pillar had chosen a mark before. Each had risen, each had fallen, and each had left behind a ward, a shimmering veil to hold the poisoner at bay. But there were also those who did not believe. To them, the ward was nothing more than a story to frighten children into obedience. Wards and marks, breath and bone, old names for natural things people did not yet understand. Villages moved, yes, but for soil that was exhausted, for rivers that shifted their beds, for winters too cruel to stay. Stories of shadow, nothing more than a cloak draped over hunger. At the heart of this argument sat one man. He was called Old Jarek by most, though some muttered other names: the Keeper, the Mad One, the Last Witness. At 102, his eyes had gone milk white, and his hands shook even as he clutched his walking stick. But his voice remained strong as ever. He had been a boy of 2 when the Ward of Shadow first bloomed. He claimed he remembered its brightness. He claimed he remembered its keeper. And most of all, he claimed to know what was coming. Not stories, he would rasp, when the young mocked him at market. I was there when it began to shine. I was there when it hummed in the night, a wall no shadow could pass, and now I hear it crack, like ice beneath a boot. You don't, but I do. Children laughed and imitated his quaver. Traders rolled their eyes. Even the elders who nodded politely did not wholly believe. 100 years is a long time to carry one man's memory, and time has a way of stretching truth thin. Still, when dusk came, some lingered near their doors, with eyes on the boundary. And when the ward flickered, just slightly, like the wink of an exhausted star, those who had mocked old Jarek felt their mouths go dry. Episode 1 ends here, but the mark still burns. Episode 2 coming soon.